Hey, welcome back to Faith Moves. We're diving into Hebrews chapter 11 together, and we are discovering the principles that come from God's heart for us to be able to make faith moves and move forward in our lives. And today we're diving into Hebrews 11, 22 to 29, and I want to share with you the power of courage. You know, when you read through the Bible as a whole, it's one of the things that jumps out at you. It's a dominant theme that captures our hearts when we read the Bible. We read about people like Moses, and we see there's obviously so much courage. But then throughout the scriptures, you find Daniel in the lion's den, and you find Esther going before the king. You see David facing Goliath, Ruth agreeing to stay with Naomi, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego braving the fiery furnace, Jael taking down evil King Sisera, Joshua taking over for Moses, Deborah leading the entire nation of Israel. I mean, on and on it goes. The scriptures are full of these inspiring stories of great courage. And people who make faith moves have discovered the power of courage, whether they were ready for it or not. And I'm praying that we'll catch this same heart and be able to make faith moves because we also are walking in the power of courage. Romans 15, verse 14 says, "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope." So we read all of these amazing stories of great courage in the Bible, but then Romans 15:4 is telling us they're there for a reason. And the reason is that we would be encouraged and have hope. When courage is put into us, which is what encouragement does, the result is that we will have hope. And when you really think about it, hope is the fuel for courage to be activated. And courage is something that doesn't have much value if it isn't exercised. And the way courage is exercised is through the ignition of hope that rises up on the inside. So if you want to actually grow in courage, you need more hope. And this is something that's always available in full supply from the power and presence of our God. What a gift that you and I get to live that way, that we get to live with access, never-ending access to the ever-increasing supply of the very thing that we need most if we're actually going to grow in courage so that we can make our faith steps, and that is hope. It comes from our God, who is the source of hope, the God of hope. Courage, if I could define it, is the character and ability to confront problems, uncertainty, and opposition with a strong stance and bold action despite risk, danger, and threat of loss. I know that's a lot, but that's what it is. It's a working description of courage. You know, some people say that there are different types of courage. There's physical courage, emotional courage, social courage, intellectual courage, and I'm for it, sure. But at the core, every kind of courage is ultimately that character and ability to confront problems and uncertainty and opposition with a strong stance and bold action despite the risks, dangers, and even threat of loss. You know, when I think of courage, different people come to mind, and I'm sure the same is true for you. For me, one of the people that automatically comes to my mind when I think of someone courageous is my dad. And if we've interacted before, you've heard me talk about him. He was paralyzed from the waist down, and that's a pretty big deal, especially as a guy who grew up in the 50s and 60s. And for my dad, one of the ways that courage happened to rise up in his life was when he was considering going to college. There were people who said, "Nah, you know, he's crippled," was the word they used back then. I don't know if he can make it. And he went anyway. And then when he was in college, there was a family business that he could work for, and people said, well, you know, he probably can't get around well enough to work in the family business, but he did it anyway. He was walking with mechanical metal leg braces and crutches at the time, And he found a way to get up out of a wheelchair and get around on his feet despite the fact that nobody really thought that it was possible, and did it anyway, found a way. And then there was a stirring inside of him to move out of the Midwest and go east to New York City. And of course, a lot of people said, he can't really do that. He's not going to be able to get around, doesn't have the mobility. And plus, I mean, he's crippled, is the word again that they used at the time. But my dad went anyway. And you got to imagine it, a guy with mechanical metal leg braces and canes and crutches in New York City, carrying a briefcase and having to walk blocks on end up and down stairs into the subway systems. And people were afraid he wouldn't be able to do it, but he did it. He found a way. What my dad was doing and became known for was exactly what my working definition of courage says. It's that character or ability to confront problems, uncertainty, and opposition with a strong stance and bold action despite risk, danger, and threat of loss. Who do you know that's courageous? Who comes to your mind when you think of somebody courageous? There are probably people that you can think of, and I'm curious, does my working definition of courage apply to that person? I'm guessing it probably does. But you know what? I believe that courage is something that should ultimately define you as well, and me. That we're meant to actually live this way because of who our God is and what he's deposited in us. This is the scripture that I read that reveals that. 2 Timothy 1:7. It says, the Spirit that God gives us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. The Spirit that God gives us does not make us timid. In fact, the Spirit that God gives us is the Spirit by which we can cry out like King David did in Psalm 18, verses 28 and 29 and 30, saying, my God, his light floods my life, and with my God, I can scale any wall. I can crush an army. I mean, that kind of spirit is the spirit that you and I actually have. And it allows us to make faith moves that are grounded in the power of courage. Okay, so let me just spell out a process of exercising courage. I'm going to just fly through this, and I hope that you'll at least capture the essence of it. Number one, you want to name your fears or problems. Just say them. Say what they are. We don't have to play games about it. Just say it. This is the problem I'm facing. Name the fear or the problem. Number two, consider the risks. If you're to actually do something, it's probably going to be a risk. There could be a loss. Consider it. And then number three, count the cost of inaction. This is a really important step. Count the cost of inaction. What would happen if you don't do anything at all? Think about that. Count that cost. And then number four, look fear in the face. Just look fear in the face. You need to be able to speak to the fear and tell it where to go. And you can renounce that thing that you're fearing and do so in the power of the Spirit of God. Number five, decide to do the hard thing. Decide. I'm doing it. I can because the Spirit of God is in me, and I do hard things. It's the kind of person I am. Decide to do the hard thing. And number six, tell somebody. You need to cultivate accountability. You need to seek support. So tell somebody about what you're attempting. And then number seven, figure out a way to take a first step. Because that first step will break the inertia. And very quickly, you will discover the wind in your sails called momentum coming from the Spirit of God coming alongside you. Courage doesn't always lead to victory. But not taking the step of courage will always be a defeat in and of itself. So I'm praying for you. I'm praying that you would experience the Spirit of God that does not make you timid, but instead it gives you that power and love and self-discipline through which you will be able to move through the process of courage and make some faith moves.